Well, how are you liking it?
I am quite satisfied. Um,
Very good.
yeah,
Did-
no.
Does it does it feel spacious in there?
Oh yeah. I mean, if I, if I really need to like do something, I can walk back and forth
Right.
on the mic like that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this mic actually picks up pretty well, so if I'm back here, it's not I don't lose too much as you can probably hear. There's a couple, I guess, specific questions that, you know, what I've got going on is not that crazy for a working studio musician, but it's not that common for a working voice actor.
Yeah.
Um, and so I just wanted to talk and get in, I guess, sort of layman's terms and in your expert opinion, I talked to some of my friends and asked like, hey, what questions do you have? Like what seems, so different about this compared to what most voice actors normally do, which is, record in a glorified closet. And the fact that, I, part of that is something like this is definitely not accessible to, a fair amount of voice actors who
Sure.
don't
Yeah.
have the space to do that. But I know there are plenty who do have a home office that they use and then
Mhm.
they go into their closet to record
Right.
versus what we ended up doing here is turning the home office into also the booth. And so,
Yeah.
I've got, you can see I've got like my computer in my office set up back over
Yeah.
behind me. um, so, I can speak to what I believe is some of the history of that, which is especially during the pandemic when so many, voice actors who were recording primarily in studios couldn't come into the studios. They had to improvise, and a lot of them did not have any setups at home because they would go into studios. And so a lot of voice actors were like, okay, what can I do? Well, the best I can do is go into my closet, put up some foam wedges and use my clothes as dampening,
Yeah.
and that'll get the job done.
Yeah.
And that then turned into, and this again, this is my opinion, but I think that then just turned into, oh, this is what the pros are doing, so everyone should do it. But the pros are doing it because they had to, not necessarily because they wanted to.
Right.
And then we've got a bunch of companies that popped up making these really, really tight vocal booths that are very high end with, nice air exchange and stuff like that, that definitely work. And I don't want to knock on them necessarily, but, there are people who have a home office space that are still wanting to pay ten to $15,000 for one of these studio bricks or whisper rooms
Right.
or bear cave um, boxes, when that not only is might be excessive, but based on what we've talked about and what I want to go into, also won't sound as good as something like this.
True.
So
Absolutely.
the biggest
Usually,
question,
usually these small booths, the companies that make them, they're fine. It's a good product, but they do. If you really want to optimize them, they need more treatment. There's little tones and resonances in them that it's a little bit fussy, and you have to work with it. Um, Soundproofing on some of them is questionable, but usually if you put it in an existing room, it's enough. It soundproofs you enough from the outside world. So that it couples with your room structure and gives you like a room in a room effect. So you're fairly well isolated, even though their unique isolation, just them by themselves, isn't that much. It just adds to what your existing room is. Doing
mhm,
something like you have done, it requires a person to make sure that their home is soundproof enough for them to work, because that's number one thing. You got to get it quiet so you can work.
right?
But
Yeah,
once you
no,
get
the
the
setup.
space quiet, you could treat it like this, and it's just like, oh, this is, I can do anything I want in here. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So the main question is that some people I've talked to have asked is why the whole room and why not a booth? So I was wondering if you could just go into a little bit of the specifics, the acoustic difference, talking about like that bass idea that you talked about to me before about why acoustically having a more open space is actually better for recording than being in that small space. Because a couple of the voice actors I talked to were surprised and they thought that an open room is actually worse acoustically than a tighter space.
Well,
Um,
you can answer that with your
mhm.
experience now, how
Oh
you
yeah,
feel and how the tone just is there. You don't have to add EQ and do all this, jump through these hoops to get the sound you want. If you want a real natural sound, you can get it. If you want a real compressed, real close-up sound, you can get it. If you want a faraway sound, you can get it. You know what I mean? So, yeah, and there are different techniques. Especially if you're doing ADR for movies, a lot of time all the voice isn't close up. It's a little further away. It's like, and you need a room for that.
right. Yeah.
But it
Uh,
needs to be pretty dead. But still, it's not you don't have to get that proximity. So you can do it.
right. Absolutely. Um,
uh, you want me to explain how about the resonances in a
a,
small
a,
room versus a large room?
just a little bit, just like in simple terms, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, um, our voices, male voices, resonate all the way down to 80 hertz, easy. Some even lower. I remember when I was recording. Oh, geez, come on. And Hoyt Axton, Hoyt. Oh, Hoyt, he's his real sweetheart. But he had this big voice, and I'd not only mic his mouth, but I'd mic his chest.
Hmm.
Um, and it just, get the full body sound when he sang. Um, for a male voice, it takes space. 80 hertz is a fairly long way.
Hmm.
It's I could calculate it for you. I could look it up right here. Let's see. Let me open up my calculator because it's easier. Let's see. So 80 hertz is well, I can't get to 6. See what that is. Um, eight, well, 9 feet is 125 hertz. Okay. So let's go 120. That's 10 feet. That's 112 hertz. Let's go um,
And to be
10
clear,
feet.
this is how much space is needed for that
Yeah.
frequency
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
dissipate.
12 feet is 93 hertz. So see, you need that space just for male voice. Okay. Female voice can go as low as, as 90 hertz for sure. So yeah, you need the space. It gives it a naturalness, you know. Also, in a small-ish room, which is what this is, it's still small room acoustics. You have room boundary effects, and if all your boundaries are too close, there is no place for um, distribution to exist. So distribution is non-existent in these tiny booths. Okay, you don't have any kind of mode distribution. You have a resonance here, and if you're centered, you're right in the middle of that resonance. And if you're centered this way, you're in the middle of that resonance. And if you're centered heightwise, you're in the middle of it's the worst place to be. So you never want to be in the middle of any room dimensions, really, for miking, that is, for recording.
Hmm.
Um, it, that creates their own some some of their own problems. Having these very small spaces, you're limited in what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And those acoustic wedges don't, especially the low end, they don't
They do
absorb.
nothing. They do nothing for low frequency, but they do fine all the way down to maybe 500 hertz. You know, and they're just don't.
And that makes sense because when I was in my little booth on my microphone, I had the low cut on
Uh-huh.
because I needed it, and
Mm.
it worked. But
This is,
I'm
by the way, this is dragon fruit.
nice.
Hmm.
Uh, and so, but now I don't need that anymore. Um, I had a calibration meeting with a recording engineer who does ADR and dubbing the other
Uh-huh.
day to check out the studio. And he was very happy.
Yeah.
Which was, and you want to keep your engineers happy as a voice actor. So,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
um, and I think a lot of it had to do with, you know, obviously, again, this isn't necessarily a setup for everyone because not everyone can make this work. But, if you have some time and you have the space, um, he told me that like my studio sounded like top 5% of all voice actors he's worked with
Mm.
right away before we even like touched anything. And then, he went through and checked all my cable. I don't know how he does it, but some software, some way, he checked all my cables, checked my power, um, talked a little bit about mic placement and stuff, making sure that everything's in a good spot. Um, but didn't need to do a whole lot. Um, which for me was, especially after doing all this work,
Ah,
I know my own ears here, but being able to talk to an industry professional who, you know, is someone that not only has expertise in this area, but also is consistently working with voice actors doing the work that I do,
yeah.
uh, was definitely very reassuring.
Yeah, that's wonderful. You'll probably want to play with the room a little bit as time goes on. You get a different book or a different script or a different thing you need to do, voiceover on something, and maybe it requires a little different kind of tone. Move over in front of that diffraction device there on the wall.
Hmm.
Play with how that sounds. In the studio, I used to go around with a single, just a plain cardioid condenser mic, a portable mixer with headphones, battery operated mixer. And I just listened for the best spot to put the mic like that with headphones. And I thought, oh, there's the spot. So I'll set my mic up there and I'll use that to record with, you know.
So when you're doing that, out of curiosity, what are you listening for?
I'm listening for tone and everything. It's what I'm listening for. What I look when you're producing or engineering,
Mhm.
you're trying to recreate a sound you hear in your head. Okay, it's like a painter. I got this vision, so you just paint it, right? So you got to put the mic in the right spot to pick up the colors that you want, kind of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. Um, I think that mostly answers that question. Um, Speaking of the diffusers behind me,
Hmm.
uh, which I guess I don't know if I can see this one a lot clearer.
Yeah, there you
Uh,
go.
which are essentially wood boxes with a bunch of different, specifically uh measured slats going along it.
Hmm.
Um, can you talk a little bit about what they actually do? Because again, that is something that you don't see a lot in voiceover booths because it's just,
Well,
again, it's all
tell
about
me
that.
what you perceive, and I'll explain what they're supposed to do. But you tell me what you hear when you're standing there and you're talking or you listen to some sound and you stand near them. What do you hear?
Um, well, I'll walk back and
Okay.
well, I can't hear you, but um I definitely can tell depending if I'm standing in front of a panel or if I'm standing in front of. I I don't know if you can hear me at all, but
Absorption, I can hear you. Yes.
standing in front of the diffuser, there's definitely like a very light kind of almost resonance.
Is it a
But
sense of space? Does it sound like more space?
yeah, yes,
That's what it's
yeah,
supposed to sound like. The reason I ask because I want to know if it's working right.
yeah. It almost had a feel of like talking into a hallway.
Yeah, there you go. So it's a sense of space. What it does, due to the different distances in the surfaces of those the pieces of wood, the sound is bouncing off of each one. It gives you a specular reflection. However, due to the distance, it changes the reflection distance and therefore does a phase change on the reflection. There's different phase coming back at you. And we sense phase change as space. So it makes the room seem to have more space. If it was all absorption panels, it would just be a dead room and it wouldn't be any fun. Let me put it that way. There's no fun in it, you know? Um,
Mhm.
yeah, there's no sex in your violence, kind of thing. um, so yeah, you want yeah, we need to hear space. Uh, it's it's also quality that tells the primitive brain that you're not in an anechoic chamber, that you're not in a space that's like I can't hear the walls, you don't that's not pleasant.
God.
um so it does several things. You can use it as an effect when recording, or you can just use it as a creature comfort device. It helps you to stay comfortable, and it feels good in there, right?
Hmm.
um and that's because it causes a phase change. It's mostly high frequency. The frequency of reflection off those slats is about 18 kilohertz, believe it or not. You're not really hearing it. It's that high. Of course, you go down to quarter waves and stuff like that, and it's lower. It gets down to 6K, but the main diffraction frequency is around 18K, believe it or not.
Interesting.
So it adds a little bit of air to the room, kind of.
Yeah. And that is something that um a lot of, if you're doing an audiobook or something, or your EQ, um at least I found is that a lot of time when you're EQing for an audiobook and you have to do your own mastering, or if you're sometimes even with auditions, one of the first things that goes into EQing is adding that air to
Ah,
your spectrum. That's,
hmm,
I've talked to a couple engineers who've done that for me when I was in my other studio, and
yeah.
just that's like one of the first things I see. I've watched videos and stuff like that of like how do you master your recording audio, and one of the first things that happens is, okay, cut out all the frequencies that your voice doesn't sound good at, and then add some air.
Hmm, hmm.
That's that's
Okay.
that's that's something that I see super common, again, because essentially all voice actors are mostly trying to replicate the sound of like the classic voiceover recording,
Hmm.
which is a you know is a very specific microphone in a very specific space. Um, but that space had, I imagine, was a larger studio with treatment like this that had some of that air built into it.
Uh,
So I
Probably at least a larger space. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So that's very interesting. Um,
So
and
that's what you're getting. Are you saying that you didn't have to add so much air to your
yeah,
recording?
yeah, I have not. I mean, I've been in this space all of 4 days basically. Um,
Okay.
so I haven't, with it being complete. So I haven't had a ton of time to really dive in and experiment and like,
Yeah.
you know, because this past weekend my duo went on tour down to Moab for 5 days. And you know, part of the goal was like, okay, I need to get this finished before that happens at least. Um, so I haven't had a ton of time to really settle. But
Yeah.
um,
Now, one thing I got to say right now, well, before we get too far along, I've mentioned some things. You know, I asked you to listen to the diffuser and tell me what you feel.
mhm.
I've also said what it should do. And I'm telling you what should do if you have absorption in your room and whatnot. But at the same time, I don't want to bias your opinion of your room
Right.
with what I think it should sound like. You know, a lot of times I remember working with Bob Millsap, and he'd go in and I'd be mixing a record, and he'd be, "Oh, John, what was that?" And I'll rewind it. What? Where was it? And he's right there. And I go, listen. And you come to find out that he was pulling my leg. Um, but you know, we hear what we're suggested that we're hearing. You know, if you suggest something, you'll, oh yeah, I hear that. You know,
Sure. Yeah.
you know. So I don't want to bias you to
Mhm.
what you know. I'm saying you should hear this. Don't. I don't want to do that. I want you to tell me honest what you feel and here and there and everything, how you're experiencing it. I know what it should do, and I certainly hope it does that. Um, but yeah, that I
Yeah.
just
No,
want to make
no,
that point because I'm recording this. I'm going to publish this and hopefully help some people with this. And I
absolutely.
want to say that it's
Yeah. And
important.
I haven't had time to really dive into that. But
Okay.
so 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 I'm speaking to a bit of a hypothetical because I haven't gone in and tried like mess with my EQ settings and stuff like that yet.
Okay.
But
Also, here another point
just
on adding air.
yeah.
A large diaphragm microphone begins to
Mhm.
roll off from 12 to 14K. It just rolls off. So you don't have the air. Your large diaphragm microphone probably doesn't have the air that you need for voiceover. So you will probably need to add it. It's just typical. It's a large diaphragm. It's the physics of the size.
Sure.
Just like I had a mastering engineer claim that he can hear 23 hertz or whatever. He's in his 40s. No, there's no bloody way you're going to be able to hear 23 hertz. You'll be lucky if you're hearing 18 at that age. Probably, I was down to about 15K when I was in my 40s. Sorry. Today, I probably can't hear 2K. Just kidding. But seriously, when you're born, you're newborn, the diameter of your membrane of your eardrum is very small. You can hear 20 kilohertz. Depends on your size. If you're tiny babies, they can hear higher. Okay. When you grow, by the time you're 1 year old, your hearing's dropped to about 18K already at 1 year old. Okay. It's not due to hearing damage, it's due to the diameter of the membrane. It can't, it's too big to pick up that high frequency. It's math, it's physics. So there, just FYI.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating.
Okay.
I do have so leading off of what you're talking about with the microphone. So, I mean, essentially, when it comes down to it, what a voice actor wants is to not think about their space and not think about
Yeah.
your microphone and not think about, you know, the less work we have to do in terms of before and after,
Yeah.
the better. So that's part of what I wanted to hear from you is again more about like the general terms and stuff like that as it applies to my space. So that's why I was asking about like what they do, because I can say what I hear, but knowing what they actually do, I think is going to be more helpful to the general.
Well, your absorption pins absorb from 80 hertz very, very well from 80 hertz to 500.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh
then
yeah,
just flatten off up there. But from 80 hertz to 500, you have an absorption coefficient about one from above one. from 80 to 500. I'm serious. Quite a bit. That's a lot of savings in your room absorption in that range. And that just tightens everything really nice like that. The panels behind me and you're in front of you there.
Yeah. Same as
they absorb flat from 80 hertz up. It's pretty much flat absorption. So it's just really, really nice and smooth. For the open space, the larger, deeper traps that we have with the pink in it, with pink, the Owens Corning pink, that has that bump up from 80 to 500, which is just does a lot of absorption in that area. And that also catches the harmonics of the length and width and height modes of the room. And say, I forgot what your room length is. What is it?
It's about
11 feet, is it?
Yeah, about 12 feet, 12 and a half feet into the closet. What was the closet where now
okay.
the monitor is.
My microphone is 12 feet. 12 feet is about 94 hertz. So, they're getting it perfectly. So you don't have any very, very low frequency problems, not below that. I think around 46 hertz, if I'm not mistaken, about 45 hertz is your pressure limit of the room. Of course, you can hear frequencies lower than 40 hertz, but your room modes or waves don't support it. Gotcha. That's the pressure region of your room. You're not reproducing in there, and you're sitting at your desk, you're listening to music. If you have a sealed sub, it'll reproduce all the way down to 20 hertz if it can do that. But if it's ported, it'll stop at the pressure region of the room.
So the pressure region of the room, that's basically like the lowest it can handle, kind of the lowest that it'll actually carry.
Can support. Okay, when you have like room modes in a room, they're represented as little spikes on the chart, on the room mode distribution chart. Those points or lines represent what we call room gain. So when you're listening to music or speaking, those are all the points that support your voice in the room. Even though you got lots of treatment, it's going to control that. It's going to be really controlled and tight. The decay is going to be fast, but that also helps boost your voice. And so it's important to have those. In a little tiny booth, you won't have any. You really won't have any room gain or room support. And if it's untreated, you'll have too much of support. You have too much support at 3 frequencies, and that's the height, the length, and the width, and that's it. You won't have any other frequencies. They just don't distribute. So that's another reason to have a larger room. Have all these frequencies that'll boost all of your tones that you want.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
We're running a little short on time, but one thing I did want to ask about, because this is another question that comes up a lot, is about microphones and the large diaphragm condensers, because to my understanding, these microphones are built for larger rooms. They're built for more to collect more spaces, versus in a tight box, they're going to sound worse than they will in an open space.
I don't know. The microphone will work the way it works, no matter where you put it. It will do what it can do. If it does not have if it does not sense a pressure change, then it won't do anything. So you want to make sure that your room is able to well, like I said, you get your room gain from all the different modes and reflections and stuff in the room. Of course, they're controlled with the treatment, but you still have them. So it's boosting your sound. Like you say the same thing in your room, say a line, for instance, with a microphone, and then you go outside the same distance from the microphone and do the same thing. It's not going to sound good.
Right.
because your sound is like, it's distant. It's like you don't have any room gain. There's nothing supporting your tone at the microphone. See,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
that's where the room helps.
Because I was one thing I was curious. I don't know. I don't know how much if you have any thoughts about this. The engineer I talked to definitely did. A lot of voice actors nowadays are using shotgun mics
Mm-hmm.
uh, because they have a very narrow focus, and so
They do
my
that because they have bad rooms.
I was about to
That's
say
why.
my understanding is
That's what they're for. That's what shotgun mics are for. They're to follow the characters around on stage, so they don't
Mhm,
pick up anything else. Because otherwise, they're going to pick up all these reflections and echoes and stuff like that. That's why they're used. If you're in a good room, like this room has so much junk in it that I don't need much treatment. But I sound good. This is a cardioid pattern microphone. It's a kind of a big cardioid kind of pattern. It's a large diaphragm condenser. It's a tube mic.
yeah.
But it works decently enough in this room. It's not. I mean, you can hear the room. You can hear the size
Mhm.
of the room when I speak away from the mic. But it's relatively tight in here because of all the shit I full of crap. Um, but I wouldn't do voice work in here. It's not quiet enough, and it's not tight enough response wise. It's okay for podcasts and meetings.
Mhm.
Um,
Sure.
let's see. Yeah, I wouldn't be the one to recommend any certain mic. Of course, I love these Soyuz. I'm the dealer here in Indonesia. I loved them so much. I bought one. I said, make me dealer here. I'll sell them, and they did. So anyway, um,
Sure. I was just curious if you that that's just that's something that I have seen come up a lot.
yeah.
Um, one thing that I was asked about is you and I think I actually know the answer to this somewhat, but I just want to hear. I don't actually have any like bass traps up in any of the corners of like the top corners of the
You got
room.
bass traps everywhere.
Right. That's what I figured the answer was. But
Yeah. Corners are corners. They're good, but you don't need to, no, you don't need to make this goofy stuff like people do. Um, it's it really boils down to the Sabine count, which is a measure of absorption that you need in a certain space. You need X amount of this and X amount of that, you know. So we calculate about how much you would need to get this under control, and bada bing, bada boom.
Mhm.
It's good, it works. And you'll notice how if you stand in your room, you got three of those 104 panels on the ceiling. They're only 4 inches thick, and it's 4 inches of rigid fiberglass of 705.
Mhm.
That is killer for doing the job for the entire ceiling. Three panels, they're spaced, and you get a shadow effect in between them where you space them. You still have absorption all the way across and out wider than the edges, believe it or not. It's all the
Okay.
diffraction of the edges. And so you can stand under it and talk and walk around. You're not going to hear any flutter echo from the ceiling.
Mhm. Right. Okay. Cool.